"The West has no room for soft men," Caleb Doyle said, and shoved the boy face first into the dirt outside the saloon. The boy couldn't have been more than 15. Skinny wrists. A torn coat 2 sizes too big. He'd asked for water. That was all. Just water, in a voice that cracked halfway through the word. Caleb spat tobacco into the dust beside the boy's head and stepped over him like he was stepping over a dead snake. Behind him, the men at the porch laughed the way men laugh when they're afraid not to. Caleb didn't laugh. Caleb never laughed. He just walked into the saloon, the spurs on his boots ringing like small bells of warning, and the swinging doors slapped shut behind him. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Because the woman who'd been watching from the second-floor window of the boarding house across the street came down the stairs slow and steady, lifted her skirts above the manure-streaked road, and walked straight to the boy. She knelt. She poured water from her own canteen into his mouth. She lifted his head into her lap like he was something precious, and she stared across the street at the saloon door with eyes the color of river ice. Her name was Sarah Vance. She had been in Redrock 3 days. By sundown, she'd be the only person in town brave enough to say Caleb Doyle's name out loud. Inside the saloon, Caleb drank his whiskey neat and stared at his own reflection in the cracked mirror behind the bar. A face like weathered leather. A jagged scar running from temple to jaw. A souvenir from a Comanche raid 11 years back. Gray creeping into the black of his beard. Eyes that had stopped expecting anything good a long time ago. He was 38 years old. He looked 50. "You hear what they're saying about you?" the bartender asked, polishing a glass that was already clean. His name was Hollis, and he'd known Caleb since before the war. "I don't listen to what they say. They're saying you're getting mean." "I've been mean." "Meaner, then." Caleb set the glass down with a small, precise click. "What's the boy to you, Hollis?" "Nothing. He's nothing to me." Hollis kept polishing. "But that woman who picked him up out of the street? She came in here yesterday asking after a man. Tall, dark hair, scar on his face. Used to ride for the Confederacy. Used to answer to the name Caleb Doyle." The mirror reflected nothing in Caleb's eyes. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I didn't know any man by that name." Hollis met his gaze. "I'm telling you because she's still asking." Caleb finished his whiskey. He laid 2 coins on the bar. Then he walked out the back, the way a man walks who doesn't want to be seen leaving. The wind was up by the time he reached his horse. A copper haze rolled in off the flats, the kind of evening that smelled like the sky was thinking about burning. He swung into the saddle and looked once over his shoulder at the boarding house. A lamp had been lit in the upper window. A silhouette moved behind the gauze of the curtain, a woman brushing her hair out long. He told himself he was looking because she was a stranger and strangers were a risk. He told himself a lot of things. He rode the 7 miles out to his cabin slow, the way he always rode it, watching the brush, watching the ridgelines. 11 years he'd lived out past Coyote Creek. 11 years and no neighbors and no visitors and no questions. He liked it that way. He'd built it that way. Stone foundation. Iron-banded door. A rifle in every room and one buried 3 feet under the porch in an oilcloth, just in case the ones in the rooms got taken from him. A man who builds a house like that is a man waiting for someone. He just hadn't thought it would be a woman. He saw her horse first. A small gray mare tied to his hitching post, head down, drinking from the trough. Then he saw her, sitting on the steps of his porch as if she'd been invited. A rifle lay across her knees. Not pointed at him. Not exactly pointed away from him either. He reined in 20 yards out. His own rifle came easy into his hands. "Lady," he said, "you're a long way from the boarding house. You're Caleb Doyle. I'm a man on his own land at sundown, looking at a stranger holding a Winchester. My name is Sarah Vance." Her voice didn't shake. That was the first thing he noticed. The second was her hands, steady on the rifle, but the knuckles were white. "I rode out from St. Louis. It took me for months. I asked in 26 towns before someone told me you might be in Redrock." "Whoever told you," Caleb said softly, lied. "My brother's name was Thomas Vance. He rode with you in 62, at a place called Briar Hollow." She took a breath. "He didn't come home. None of them did. Except you." The wind moved through the cottonwoods behind the cabin, and somewhere out on the flats a coyote spoke once and went silent. Caleb's hand on the rifle did not tighten. It went very, very still. Which was worse? "I don't know that name." "Yes," Sarah Vance said. "You do." She lifted the rifle off her knees. For one heartbeat, He thought she was going to shoot him. He almost wanted her to. Instead, she laid it down on the porch boards beside her, deliberate as a woman setting a Bible on a table, and stood up. I didn't ride 4 months to kill you, Mr. Doyle. I rode 4 months to ask you what happened to my brother. And I'm not leaving until you tell me. The sun touched the ridge behind her and turned her hair the color of fire. Caleb Doyle, who had told a boy that morning that the West had no room for soft men, found that his throat had closed up around a word he hadn't spoken in 11 years. The word was sorry. He didn't say it. He swung down off his horse instead and walked past her into the cabin and shut the door between them. Through the iron-banded wood, he heard her sit back down on his porch. Like she meant to stay? He didn't sleep. He sat at his table with the lamp turned low and the bottle uncapped and the bottle still full, and he listened to her breathing on the other side of the door. She'd wrapped herself in a horse blanket. He could see the shape of her through the gap under the door, boots pulled close, the curve of one shoulder against the porch post. Every hour or so the wind kicked up and she shifted, and every hour or so he set his hand on the latch and didn't lift it. 11 years was a long time to keep a thing buried. Briar Hollow had been a creek bend in Tennessee where the Union flushed 23 Confederate boys out of a barn at dawn. Caleb had been the sergeant. He'd been 27 years old and stupid with belief, and when the order came down to hold the position, he'd held it. He'd held it past the point where holding made sense. He'd held it because a colonel he'd never met had told him to, and the colonel was 3 miles back with the wagons drinking coffee. 22 of those boys died in the dirt. Caleb had crawled out through a drainage ditch with a Yankee ball in his thigh, and he had not stopped crawling, in one way or another, for 11 years. Thomas Vance. Yes, he remembered the name. Thomas Vance had been 17. Red hair like the woman on his porch. A laugh too loud for a man in uniform. He'd carried a tintype of his sister in his breast pocket, and he'd shown it to Caleb the night before Briar Hollow. And Caleb had said, "Pretty girl. You write her, son. You write her tonight." Thomas Vance had written the letter. Caleb had carried it in his own pocket for 2 weeks afterward, blood-stiff and unsent, before he'd burned it in a campfire in Missouri and ridden west and never said the name again. He looked at the lamp on his table. He thought about the boy in the dirt that morning, about his own boots stepping over him, about what it had felt like to say the West has no room for soft men and mean it like a creed. He'd meant it. He still meant it. A soft man got himself killed. A soft man got the men around him killed. A soft man wrote letters home, and a soft man trusted orders, and a soft man stood in a barn at dawn waiting for the colonel's reinforcements that never came. Caleb Doyle had not been soft since he was 27 years old. And yet there was a woman on his porch wrapped in a horse blanket who had not knocked, had not begged, had not threatened, who had simply sat down. And the not knocking of her was louder than any door he had ever heard. At first light, he opened it. She was awake. She'd been awake. He could tell from the way she didn't startle. "Coffee," he said. She looked up at him. "That's not an answer to my question," she said. "It's coffee. Take it or don't." She took it. She came inside and sat at his table the way she'd sat on his porch, like she'd been invited, like she belonged, like nothing in the world was going to move her until she was ready to be moved. He set the tin cup in front of her. His own hand, he noticed, was steady. He didn't know why that surprised him. "You were at Briar Hollow," she said. "I was." "You were the sergeant." "I was." "My brother died there." "Yes." She set the cup down. She did not cry. He had braced for the crying, and the crying did not come, and somehow the absence of it gutted him worse than tears would have. "How?" she said. "Lady, how?" So he told her. He told her about the barn and the dawn and the order to hold. He told her about the Yankee skirmishers in the tree line and the way the first volley had come through the slats of the wall like nails through paper. He told her about Thomas, your brother, taking a ball in the belly in the second minute, and about crawling to him through the straw, and about Thomas grabbing his wrist and saying, "Don't let me die in the dark, Sergeant. Please don't let me die in the dark." He told her that he had carried the boy to the open doorway so Thomas could see the sky. He told her that the sky had been pink. He did not tell her that he had not been able to look at a pink sky in 11 years without his hands beginning to shake. She sat very still. The coffee in front of her went cold. Outside, his rooster, which had not crowed in 2 days because Caleb had been thinking about killing it, crowed. "There was a letter," she said. "Yes." "Where is it?" "I burned it." Something moved in her face then. Not anger. Worse, disappointment. The deep, exhausted disappointment of a person who has traveled 4 months to reach a door and found the door empty. Why? Because I couldn't read it again. And I couldn't send it. And I couldn't keep carrying it. You could have sent it. I couldn't. You could have sent it, Mr. Doyle. You had a horse. You had hands. You had a tongue in your head and an address on the envelope. You could have sent it. He stared at the table. Yes, he said. I could have. She stood up so fast the chair scraped. She went to the door. She put her hand on the latch and stopped. He watched her shoulders rise and fall once. Twice. My mother died waiting for word, she said, without turning. 2 winters after the war. She kept asking the postwriter. Every week. Anything from Tennessee. Anything at all. And the postwriter would shake his head and ride on, and she would go back inside and sit by the window. She died sitting by that window, Mr. Doyle, with her hands in her lap, waiting for a letter you had already burned. He could not speak. I am not going to shoot you, Sarah Vance said. I thought I might. I am not going to. She opened the door. But there are men coming from St. Louis who will. My brother's commanding officer wrote a report. It named you. It named what happened at Briar Hollow. The Union Pension Board has been investigating for 2 years. I am only the first person who found you, Mr. Doyle. I am not the last. She paused in the doorway. You have maybe 4 days. She walked out, and the door swung shut behind her, and Caleb Doyle sat at his table with a cup of cold coffee and the realization that the woman who'd come to bury him had just tried, instead, to warn him. He found her in Redrock 2 days later. He'd told himself he wasn't going. He'd saddled the horse for supplies. He'd ridden into town with his rifle in the scabbard and his pistol on his hip and a leather pouch of gold dust he'd been saving for 11 years for the day he had to run. He did not buy supplies. He went to the boarding house. She opened the door on the second knock. She'd been writing a letter. He could see the ink on her fingers. Her hair was loose. Without the rifle across her knees, she looked younger than she had on his porch. Maybe 26. Maybe 27. Old enough to have outlived her mother. Young enough to still be angry about it. You came back, she said. You said 4 days. I did. How many men? 3. She stepped aside to let him in. He didn't move. A federal marshal and 2 deputies. They left Jefferson City the day before I left St. Louis. They've been tracking the same trail. I just rode faster. Why? Why did I ride faster? Why did you warn me? She looked at him for a long moment. The hallway behind her smelled like lavender and old wood. Somewhere in the boarding house a piano was being badly played, the same 4 notes over and over. Because my brother grabbed your wrist, she said quietly, and asked you not to let him die in the dark. And you carried him to the sky. Caleb did not answer that. He couldn't. Pack your things, he said. Now. What? They're not 3 days out. They're here. I saw 3 horses at the livery I didn't recognize, written hard, government brands on the saddles. They came in this morning. Hollis is lying to them at the saloon right now, but he won't lie long. He's a friend, but he's a friend with a wife and a son, and lying to federals gets a man hanged the same as anything else. Her face went the color of paper. They'll arrest you. They'll hang me. Pack. And me? You're the witness. You're the one who can put me at Briar Hollow. They'll keep you alive long enough to testify, and then they'll put you on a stagecoach east, and somewhere between here and Missouri the stagecoach will hit a washout, and you'll never make it home. His voice was perfectly level. I've seen it done. Pack. She packed. It took her 4 minutes. He stood in the hallway with his back to her open door, watching the stair landing, his hand resting easy on the pistol grip. 4 minutes was a long time when you were counting. He counted. At 3 minutes and 40 seconds, boots came up the stairs. 3 pairs. Heavy. Not hurrying. The walk of men who believe they had a man cornered. Window, Caleb said, without turning his head. What? Window. Go. Now. Climb down the porch roof. My horse is in the alley behind. There's a second one tied beside him. The bay. Yours. Go. Caleb. It was the first time she'd said his name. Go, Sarah. She went. He heard her boots on the windowsill. He heard the soft scrape of her body on the shingles. He heard, somewhere below, the small startled snort of a horse being untied in a hurry. Then he stepped into the hallway and met the marshal at the top of the stairs. The marshal was a tall man with a gray mustache and a star pinned to a coat that had seen too much summer. His hand was already on his pistol. So were the hands of the 2 deputies behind him. Caleb Doyle, the marshal said. I don't know that name. You're him. Maybe. Maybe not. Sergeant Caleb Doyle, 12th Tennessee. Wanted on charges of dereliction at Briar Hollow, March of '62, in the deaths of 22 men under your command. The 4 notes on the piano downstairs kept playing. Caleb's hand was on his pistol. He had not drawn it. None of the 4 men had drawn. They stood in the narrow hallway breathing each other's air, and Caleb thought, very clearly, if I draw I will kill the marshal and probably 1 deputy, and the 3rd one will kill me, and the woman will get away. It was a fair trade. He almost made it. Then the marshal said, we just want to talk, son. Son. It was the wrong word. It was the word a colonel 3 miles back from a barn might have used. It was the word that had cost 22 boys their lives in March of '62. Caleb almost drew on the word alone. Instead, he said, talk. There's been new testimony. From a Captain Aaron Hill, formerly of the 12th. He's dying of consumption in a hospital in St. Louis. He gave a deposition last month. He says the order to hold at Briar Hollow didn't come from you. He says it came from a Colonel Marsh, and that Marsh countermanded your request to withdraw 3 separate times. He says you tried to save those boys, Sergeant. He says Briar Hollow was Marsh's crime, not yours. Caleb's mouth went dry. Colonel Marsh, he said, sits in the Tennessee State Legislature now. We've been investigating him for 2 years. We need your testimony to indict him. Yours and the woman's, if she'll give it. The woman, Sarah Vance. We know she rode here looking for you. We've been following her since St. Louis to make sure no one got to her first. There are men who don't want Marsh indicted, Sergeant. Powerful men. They know about Miss Vance. They've been a week behind us the whole way. The marshal's eyes went past Caleb to the open window at the end of the hall. Where is she? The piano stopped. In the alley below, hooves struck cobblestone. 2 horses, hard, going west. And from somewhere across town, faint but coming, the answering rumble of more horses. Many more. Coming in fast from the east road. The marshal's face went white. They're here, he said. They beat us. Sergeant, those are the men who don't want Marsh indicted. They will kill her on sight. Go. Caleb was already moving. He didn't draw his pistol. He didn't need to. He threw himself through the open window onto the porch roof, slid down the shingles, hit the alley running. His horse was gone. She'd taken the bay and led his own behind her, and he ran on foot through the alley toward the gunfire that had not yet started. The riders from the east road came around the corner of the mercantile in a cloud of red dust, 6 of them, rifles drawn, and at the head of them rode a man Caleb knew. A man with 1 eye and a Confederate cavalry coat. Colonel Marsh had not waited for the legislature. Colonel Marsh had come himself. He caught up with her at the bend in Coyote Creek. The bay had thrown a shoe. She was kneeling beside the horse in the shallow water, her hands shaking finally shaking, prying the bent iron loose with the blade of a folding knife. She heard him come up the bank, and she did not lift her head, but her shoulders eased a 1/4 inch, and that was how he knew she'd been afraid he was someone else. Marsh is in town, he said. She closed her eyes. The marshal told you. The marshal told me. Then it's true. It's true. She let the bent shoe fall into the creek. The water carried it 3 feet downstream and pinned it against a stone. He wrote my mother a letter, Sarah said quietly. After the war. Colonel Marsh did. He said Thomas died bravely under the command of an incompetent sergeant who refused to withdraw. He said my brother's death was the fault of a Tennessee boy named Caleb Doyle. Her voice did not break. It went somewhere worse, flat, the way ice is flat. My mother believed him. My mother went to her grave hating your name, Mr. Doyle. She made me promise to find you. She made me promise. He sat down on the bank above her. He didn't trust his legs. I burned the letter from your brother, he said, because I couldn't bear to read it. I burned it the same week I read in a Knoxville paper that Colonel Marsh had been promoted. I burned the letter and I rode west, and I told myself I was finished with names. Yours, his, mine, all of them. I built a cabin where no one would knock. I bought iron for the door. I bought a rifle for every room. I told myself for 11 years that the West had no room for soft men, and what I really meant, was that the West had no room for me. She was still kneeling in the water. She lifted her head. The light through the cottonwoods made shifting patterns on her face. Gold and shadow, gold and shadow. My brother's letter, she said. Do you remember what it said? I remember every word. Tell me. So he told her. He told her, sitting on the bank above Coyote Creek with Colonel Marsh's 6 riders somewhere behind them and the sun climbing toward noon, the contents of a letter he had carried in his breast pocket for 14 days in March of 1862 and then burned in a campfire in Missouri. He told her about Thomas writing that the food was good, which was a lie. About Thomas writing that the sergeant was a good man, which Caleb had not been able to believe. About Thomas writing, "Tell Sarah I am coming home, and tell her I am bringing her a ribbon from the first town we ride through that has ribbons." When he finished, she had begun, finally, to cry. She cried the way some women cry, without sound, without movement, the tears just coming the way rain comes, with no warning and no shame. He climbed down to the creek. He took off his coat and laid it on the bank, and he took off his gun belt and laid it on the coat, and he waded into the water to his knees and knelt across from her. He did not touch her. He had not earned the right to touch her, and he knew it, and he would not have touched her even if she had asked. He reached into the inside pocket of his vest instead. He pulled out a small square of cloth, folded many times. It was brown with age and rust brown along one edge where blood had soaked through and dried 14 years ago. He opened it. Inside was a tintype, a girl with long hair and a half-smile, sitting in a photographer's chair with her hands folded in her lap. About 13 years old in the picture. Maybe 14. "He showed me this," Caleb said. "The night before. I told him to write you. He wrote you that same night. When I carried him to the door, this fell out of his pocket. I picked it up. I have carried it for 11 years. Sarah Vance looked at the picture of herself. She made a sound he would remember for the rest of his life. It was not a word. It was the sound a person makes when something they thought was lost forever turns out to have been carried, all this time, in someone else's pocket. She took the tintype from his hand. Her fingers brushed his. "Scars mean it lived," she whispered, and he didn't know if she was talking about the photograph or the bloodstain or him. "Sarah, I came here to hate you, Caleb Doyle. I know. I cannot find it in me to hate you anymore." He looked down at the water moving past his knees. He looked at the small square of cloth in her hand, the tintype of a girl who had grown into the woman across from him. He thought about the boy in the dirt outside the saloon. He thought about the words "the West has no room for soft men," and how he had been wrong, not in the way he had thought he might be wrong, but in a deeper way. The West had room for soft men. The West needed soft men. The West had been built on hard men and was being eaten alive by hard men. And the only thing that had ever made any of it worth keeping was the soft men who refused, in the middle of all that hardness, to step over a boy asking for water. He had been hard for 11 years. He was going to spend whatever years he had left being something else. "They'll come down this creek," he said. "Marsh and his men. They'll find our tracks at the bend. Yes. There's a place. A box canyon. 2 miles up. I scouted it when I built the cabin. I always thought I'd use it to run. Now I'm thinking I'll use it different." "Caleb." "Yes. If we live through today," Sarah Vance said, folding the tintype back into the cloth and pressing it against her heart. "I want you to come east with me. To St. Louis. To the deposition. I want you to tell what Marsh did. I want you to bury the lie he wrote about my brother. And then I want you to ride home with me, Mr. Doyle, to my mother's grave. I want you to tell her, in the dirt, what really happened to her son." He looked at her across the water. For the first time in 11 years, Caleb Doyle smiled. It was a small smile. A crooked smile. A smile that hurt his face the way muscles hurt after long disuse. But it was a smile. "Up the creek," he said. "Now? We've got maybe 20 minutes. He picked up his gun belt. He picked up his coat. He held out his hand, and Sarah Vance, the woman who had come 1,000 miles to bury him, took it and let him help her out of the water. The box canyon was a horseshoe of red rock with one mouth and one mouth only. He'd seen it the second year after the war and filed it away in his mind the way men file away graves they might one day need. He put Sarah at the back of it, behind a fallen cottonwood, with her rifle and 40 rounds. "Don't shoot until I'm down," he said. "Caleb, don't shoot until I'm down. If I'm not down by the time they reach the cottonwood, don't shoot then either. Run up the cleft behind you. It comes out at a sheep trail. The trail meets the Jefferson Road in 6 miles. The marshal is on the Jefferson Road. He's coming. I just need to give him time. You're going to stand in the open. I'm going to stand in the mouth of the canyon. They'll kill you. Not all of them. Not before the marshal gets here." He checked the loads in his pistol. He checked them twice. Marsh wants me alive to know who killed me. He'll talk first. Men like Marsh always talk first. That's how I'll give the marshal the time. She caught his sleeve. Caleb, please. He looked at her hand on his sleeve. I have been waiting 11 years for a reason to do this right, he said. Don't take it from me. He kissed the back of her hand once, very briefly, the way a man might kiss a relic. And then he walked out into the mouth of the box canyon and stood there with his rifle butted against his hip and the sun behind him. He didn't have to wait long. They came around the bend at a trot, 6 riders in a loose wedge, and at the point of the wedge rode a man with one eye and a gray Confederate coat and a face Caleb had last seen across a campaign tent in February of 1862. Colonel Marsh reined in 20 yards out. His one eye took in the canyon mouth, the lone figure, the lack of cover, and a thin, satisfied smile bent his mouth. Sergeant Doyle. Colonel, I had wondered if you were still alive. I had wondered the same about you. You should have stayed west, Sergeant. You should have stayed in your cabin with your iron door and let an old man's reputation sleep. I should have, Caleb agreed. I'm done with should-haves. Marsh's smile thinned. Where is the woman? Gone. That is a lie. It's the truest thing I've said in 11 years. Marsh studied him. The one eye was very still. Behind him, the 5 riders shifted in their saddles. One of them, a tall man with a bandolier, eased his rifle out of the scabbard. You know I cannot let her testify, Marsh said. I know. You know I cannot let you testify. I know that too. Then we understand each other, Sergeant. We do, Colonel. We always did. Caleb's voice was very calm. You sent 22 boys into a barn at Briar Hollow because the position looked good on a map you were drawing for General Bragg. You countermanded my withdrawal 3 times because pulling back would have spoiled the map. And then you wrote a letter to a woman in Missouri telling her that her son died because of an incompetent sergeant, because you needed a name to put under the word blame. And the name you chose was mine. It was a small letter. It killed her. Then you should have written your own. There was no wind in the canyon. There was no birdsong. There was only the sound of 6 horses breathing and the very small sound, very far off, of more horses coming hard from the south, the Jefferson Road, the Marshall, 6 miles becoming 5 becoming 4. Marsh heard them. His one eye flicked south. The thin smile died. Take him, he said. The tall man with the bandolier raised his rifle. Caleb shot him out of the saddle before the rifle came level. He shot the second man as the second man's horse shied. He shot the third as the third tried to wheel. The fourth got a bullet off. It took Caleb low in the left side, just above the belt, and turned him a quarter step, and he shot the 4th man anyway, because a man with a hole in his side can still pull a trigger if he decides to. Marsh drew last. Marsh had always drawn last. It was how Marsh had survived 4 years of war and 11 years of peace. He drew last, and he drew accurate, and his bullet caught Caleb in the meat of the right shoulder and spun him all the way around. Caleb landed on one knee. His pistol was empty. He let it fall. He picked up the rifle from the dirt beside him with his offhand, the left hand, the wounded side, and he brought it up the way a man brings up a hammer at the end of a long day, slow and certain, and Colonel Marsh, who had been wheeling his horse for a second shot, looked down the barrel of it and understood, in the last half-second of his life, that he had finally met a sergeant who would not be countermanded. Caleb fired. Marsh came out of the saddle. The 6th rider, the last one, threw down his pistol and put both hands in the air and started to weep. The marshal's posse came around the bend at a hard gallop 40 seconds later. Caleb did not die. The bullet in his side had missed everything that mattered. The bullet in his shoulder had not. He lost the full use of his right arm. He learned, slow and humbling, to shoot left-handed, to write left-handed, to lift a coffee cup left-handed. Sarah teased him about it for the rest of his life, and he let her, because being teased by Sarah Vance was a thing he had decided. In that box canyon, he was going to spend the rest of his days deserving. He testified in St. Louis. The deposition took 4 days. Colonel Marsh was indicted posthumously, his name struck from the rolls of the Tennessee legislature, his pension revoked, his reputation buried under a paper avalanche so thick it would never be dug out. 22 letters were sent by the Federal Pension Board to the families of the boys who had died at Briar Hollow. Each letter, by Caleb's request, included a copy of Thomas Vance's last note to his sister, the words he had remembered, transcribed in his own left hand. They rode to Missouri together. Sarah's mother's grave was on a hill outside a little town called Greenfield, under a hickory tree. Caleb knelt on the bare dirt in front of the stone, and he told a dead woman, out loud and in detail, what had really happened to her son. He told her about the pink sky. He told her about the ribbon Thomas had meant to buy. He told her he was sorry he had burned the letter, and he asked her, formally, like a man asking permission of a father, if he might court her daughter. The wind moved through the hickory leaves. Sarah stood behind him with her hand on his good shoulder. He took that as a yes. They went back to the cabin past Coyote Creek, but not to live in it. He built a new house on the south side of the creek, 2 stories, with windows. Real windows. With no iron on the door. The old cabin he kept as a barn. The rifle buried under the porch in oilcloth he dug up and traded to a passing tinker for a set of brass curtain rings. They had 3 children. The first was a boy. They named him Thomas. Years later, after Caleb was gone, Sarah Vance Doyle would sit on the porch of the South house and tell her grandchildren about the day she rode out to a cabin past Coyote Creek to bury a man and ended up marrying him instead. She would tell them about the boy in the dirt outside the saloon. She would tell them what their grandfather had said that morning. The West has no room for soft men. And she would tell them how he had spent every day after Briar Hollow's reckoning proving himself, gently and stubbornly and on purpose, wrong. And when the grandchildren asked her, as grandchildren do, what the West did have room for, she would smile the small, crooked smile she had learned from him, and she would look out at the cottonwoods turning gold along the creek, and she would say, men who carry a boy to the sky, and women who ride 1,000 miles to find out why. On the beam above the door of the South house, carved by a left-handed knife, 2 names. The wind in the cottonwoods. The water in the creek. The long gold light of a western evening, going on and on and on.